Sit down, settle in, and we'll get you going.
Like the nuns in The Sound of Music say, how do you review a game like Cyberpunk 2077? It's a question I've been considering and singing to myself since the release of the 1.5 patch, properly bringing the game to the new generation of consoles. Before we use our personal USB cables to jack into the net, I'm going to establish how I felt about the game before, having played it at release back in space year 2020 on the then brand new PlayStation 5. Not to be too dismissive, I thought it was kinda shite. It crashed every 30 to 40 minutes of my 50-ish hours with the game. I couldn't find a single character to like. It was kind of ugly, both in sentiment and design. Every encounter boiled down to shooting baddies over and over. There's too much shit in the ground, and the driving was honking. This doesn't even touch on the troubled production of the game, with stories of staff having to work long hours, many features promised and not delivered, a ghastly marketing campaign, and the practically unplayable versions of the game launched on PS4 and Xbox One. So with all this in mind, why did I come back to Night City? Well, like Paul Bettany from the Da Vinci Code, I just like to punish myself. It's my Catholic side manifesting, I think. This is going to be a review in multiple parts, because I'm too tired to try and make one that kind of links together organically.
Gotta be some kind of scam.
No, gonna have a word with the super. Oh yeah.
Part 1. V. First time around I chose to go male V, and I thought he was a total bellend. I just couldn't get along with how he acted, although I acknowledge that sometimes that was down to me not paying attention during cutscenes, but I just didn't like him, I just didn't like his voice. Not liking the main character makes it pretty tough to enjoy the game you're playing, so my first playthrough was always doomed to end in misery. Having started the game from scratch with the latest patch, I decided to go with female V, as she's also now the version of the character on the wee icon that comes up when you upgrade your game. And I'll be honest, I definitely like the character more now. The relationships with other characters seem to make a bit more sense, especially with Jackie, the only bearable character for the first part of the game. And the voice acting is a definite improvement. So that's 1 point for my experience with the 1.5 patch, although chances are I would have preferred this version of the character originally too.
Would have thought you'd find it too exotic.
Part 2. Every other cunt in the game. Well, I quite like Jackie for the most part, but it's a shame the majority of her time with the character spent shooting and not like chatting or having a drink or anything. If there's something the game needs, it's folk you actually want to spend time with. The character you probably spend the most time with is Big John Wick himself, and over time he does become tolerable. But I find it hard to actually like him. More a personal preference, I suppose. But what is this daft video other than a list of my personal preferences, broadcast to literally tens of people?
Hey!
Part 3. Combat. Originally, when they were promoting the game, we were told of all these amazing classes that were coming to the game. Well, like me hoping I was going to grow to reach average height, it didn't fucking happen. Instead, we get the option to shoot folk or set them on fire. And as a wee treat, you can sometimes do both. For me, almost every encounter with an enemy starts with me hiding behind some bins, scanning the baddies, and then setting them on fire if they don't like fire, or give them a big electric shock if they don't like shocks. Then I might shoot them a little, but only if I can't avoid it. Most of the time I'll throw some of my endless collection of grenades until I can loot the meat that used to be a person. It does start out to be pretty fun, but once you establish the best combat loop, there's very little reason to change it beyond powering up some of your abilities. I think I personally fell into this pattern because actually shooting folk in Cyberpunk is pretty unsatisfying. Lining up a wee headshot to see that it causes, 12 points of damage, it's quite disheartening. If someone is still walking about after you sink a bullet into their dome, I'm going home. Using your quick hacks to remove vision, stop movement, etc. are all well and good, but why use them when you can just set everyone on fire? I don't know. Part 4. Story in that. I'm a very easy mark for science fiction and cyberpunk, so I actually quite like some of the big story beats, but it's hard to care too much when everything about the game world is so miserable. The people are downtrodden, lying about in the streets while the rich and terrible live in impossible towers above. Alright, right now you're thinking, so just like now? And you'd be right, but is it so wrong to want to play something set in the future that could have like a sliver of hope or beauty? I don't mean it has to be like Animal Crossing in the future, but a bit of light goes a long way. The side missions can be fun too, but you get texts from Virtual Auto Trader every 3 minutes asking you to come buy some shite motor off some cunt you've never met. At least when you got a phone call off your cousin in GTA 4, you might then get to go bowling. Part 5. Driving. It's still terrible. The bikes handle better than the cars, but only in the same way that a smaller elephant weighs less than a big elephant, but you'd fuck your back trying to lift either of them. Part 6. Conclusion. What the 1.5 patch does, more than anything, is to help you move past the technical issues that turned even the most forgiving of players into a rabid beast, snarling at their big daft telly every time the game crashed. The problem is, solving the technical issues doesn't leave us with a gleaming example of how the game should be. There's still a lot that would stop me from personally recommending Cyberpunk 2077, but then I've still found myself sticking it on and having what an outside observer would describe as good fun. I think a lot of my tolerance for the game comes from the fact that I love the concept of the game. I love the potential it could have, and I play it to get close to some version that will probably only ever exist in my own head. If you already own the game and fancy seeing if it's improved, then go ahead and reinstall it. But imagine many folk will come to the same basic conclusion that me and my wife had about our 2006 plate Vauxhall Mariva. Just because it works, it doesn't mean that it's not a terrible piece of shit. 6 out of 10.